Welcome to Vermonters in Business, where we highlight some of the very best business leaders in our state and the amazing things they're doing in their communities. People of Vermont, welcome to Vermonters in Business, where our mission is to highlight the businesses and business leaders in our state that are doing amazing work in both of their communities and their careers. I am your co-host, Drew Kinney. We've got a great show today, but please, before we jump too far in, please help me welcome my co-host, Travis Spencer. Travis is a serial entrepreneur, a local business enthusiast, and around here we know him as a world-class insurance agent, king of the hot take. Travis, how are we doing today?
Doing great. I haven't done an insurance rant, so I'm going to open with an insurance rant today. All right. Since we're talking about vacation homes and second properties, we're going to have a great conversation. People need to be honest and upfront with us. Okay. First and foremost, we get a lot of people who try to hide what they're doing with their property. Yeah. Insurance company's always going to find out.
Eventually,
yeah. So just be upfront. You'll save everyone a lot of headaches and, writing you a policy that's going to get canceled in a year. So just be honest. It makes everyone's job easier.
I like it.
That's it for today.
All right, Travis. Joining us today is Julie Marks from the Vermont Short-Term Rental Alliance. Julie, how are we doing today?
I'm doing very well. Thank you.
First podcast, or have you done a podcast before?
I've done a couple podcasts before, but obviously my first with you.
We've got a seasoned vet, Travis. This is good. A lot of first timers today. So yeah. So you are originally from Heinsberg, and you made it to Jericho.
Yes.
So have you had any stops in between there?
Migrating north?
Yeah. What's the?
Growing up, I didn't know the roads of Jericho at all. It was like totally foreign territory.
Right.
I've made big moves. But no, in between, I've spent many years outside of Vermont. I went to college in Australia.
Oh, wow.
So I lived out there for 3 years.
That's outside Vermont.
Yes. People have been blowing my minds today, Travis.
Yeah, as far away as you could get. Which is what happens to, you when you grow up in Vermont.
Yeah, for
After, you hit 18, you're like, get me out of here.
Yep.
Lived in Wyoming and Seattle for 5 years.
Wow.
Came back to Vermont in 2017.
Okay.
Settle in Jericho.
Nice. All right, I like it. Jericho's a good town.
It's kind of like Wyoming.
Yeah, exactly. We've been pleasantly surprised today with hearing people one of our guests, I think she was in Catskill, New York, and then came to Vermont, but then in between that she was in London, so it was like I'm like, oh, all right.
Well, you grew up in Vermont and thought you were going to college in Virginia, but it was basically
it's basically Vermont. Yeah, but, not nearly as far as Australia though. That's a heck of a move. Awesome. Well, we're going to dive into all things Vermont Short-Term Rental Alliance here in a second. But before we do that, the first thing we do with all our guests is jump into something we call the Vermont Hot Seat. Julie, are you ready for the hot seat?
I'm ready.
All right, cool. Pancakes or waffles? What are you having with your Vermont maple syrup?
Can I be really honest?
Yeah.
Most likely bourbon.
All right. That's a good one. That's a tweak. That's a little different than what we usually get. I like it.
But if I had to choose, I'd go pancakes.
All right. Okay. Cool. A perfect day for you. Is it a winter day at the mountain or a summer day at the lake?
It is a summer day at the lake for sure.
And it's definitely that time of the year we're all sick of winter. So
yes.
Not to timestamp this episode, but we're ready for summer.
We're ready. Yes, I'll take spring.
Yeah. It is your birthday, and you can go to any restaurant in the state. Where are you going to dinner?
Oh, I always go to Trattoria Delia, downtown Burlington.
Okay.
They have the best bread and butter
of
any place in the world, and doesn't take much more than that to make me happy.
The bread and butter is what does it. Oh my gosh, amazing. All right, it's a hot summer day. What is your creamy order and from where?
Straight up maple from Palmer's.
There we go. Palmer's is hitting it out.
We had so many.
Palmer's.
We had so many people in the Jericho area that they've just been crushing today.
And they're guests tomorrow.
Yep.
Oh,
good. Show them up.
Well, can I give them a little shout out? They we hired their creamy truck to come to our house for our wedding last summer, and it was amazing.
Very cool. Yeah, we need to get that truck.
So many things I'd redo for my wedding.
Yeah.
Creamy truck.
All right. Well, that's the hot seat. You survived.
Okay.
Good job.
I proved my Vermontiness.
Yep. All right. So let's dive into some short-term rental talk. Travis, why don't you take us away?
Yeah, Julie, why don't you just tell us about the organization and what you guys do?
Yeah, so the Vermont Short-Term Rental Alliance, we call VTSTRA, is a business association for the vacation rental community of Vermont.
Yep.
I launched this association back in the beginning of 2021. Really, the initial need was a regulatory one. There were lots of laws being proposed, both in local communities and then at the state level, that would have had really detrimental impacts on the industry, and nobody was representing this community at the time, which I found wild. And because it is such a old tradition in Vermont, and it's so tied to like the image of Vermont when you think about traveling to Vermont and vacationing in Vermont, right? Sure. You think the cabin and or the lake camp, and so I really just started this association with a few other local hosts that I had gotten to know in the area, to try to shed some awareness on people.
Did you find it was more of, people weren't aware of what was being proposed, or was it that just there wasn't a unified voice coming from that community?
I think it was both. Yeah. I think regulations were started to be talked about behind doors where they didn't have any stakeholders represented. So they were having these conversations about an industry without an expert in the room to advise them on the nuances and the realities. And so that's always hard to watch, especially when you start getting like media reporting on things, and what you do or your business isn't actually being portrayed accurately.
Right.
And that was just a symptom of them not having a resource to go to. So, one of the things that we do a lot of now as a more established association is just being that resource for media with questions, for state agencies with questions, for other associations that have fringe or overlapping interests. Like I spend my day just fielding questions a lot of the time.
Yep. And one of the things you want to talk about are some of the myths about short-term rentals in Vermont.
Yeah.
Why don't you,
there's
elaborate
so many.
on that?
Okay, well, the big one, the elephant in the room is housing. There's a strong sentiment about short-term rentals taking away from long-term rentals or driving up the cost of housing. If only it was that simple. It's really not. Vermont is one of the only states in this region that have not done an impact analysis on short-term rental activity specifically, but in New Hampshire and Maine, their governments looked into this and found, and Canada did as well, found that short-term rental activity, which was very similar to here in growth and abundance, did not have any effect on rent prices, on home prices, and that's largely because they just don't equate generally, or not a large enough of, not enough of them do. So really the relationship to housing is so minimal, especially in a state like Vermont, where one of our main economic industries is tourism.
Correct,
and a lot of our local businesses and our residents rely on that tourist activity and spending to support their businesses. So that's a big one. Short-term rentals are not impacting housing in the way that is often thought of or portrayed, especially on social media. There's always a local caveat of town by town, and that certainly can vary a little bit, but generally when we're looking at the state level in most of Vermont towns, we have a very reasonable supply of vacation rentals in this state, and one that I think we should be a little bit more supportive of.
Well, I think the narrative probably changed just from what I viewed is I think historically people viewed short-term rentals as the condo at the mountain, that lake cabin that you talked about. But then we started to see the expansion of people buying single-family homes and using them as rentals. And I think to your point, the narrative then switched where it was very easy for people to say, well, someone could be living there full time. But unless you really break down the numbers to see, in a city like Burlington, how many single family homes are actually being rented out on a short-term basis, and is it really enough to impact? And I think that's kind of the point you're getting at. It's very easy to run with a media narrative of like, oh my gosh, but if it's 1%, really what's the impact?
Right. Yeah, there's a big difference between the sentiment of, oh, what if this happens, or this could happen. But when you look at the information and the data, that's really what we should be making decisions based off of, not the fear of something happening in the future that's not happening now. Or, it's a very different way to approach policy. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I found it very interesting in Vermont. The latest census data has actually shown the number of second homes is declining, really for the first time in many years. Okay. And the number of homeowners or home ownership is up almost to the same amount that second home is down. So from that viewpoint, and it also gets complicated to understand what's happening in housing because everybody has, these different agencies have different definitions for what constitutes, one type of property versus another. So from the census, they're looking at owner-occupied, renter-occupied, and seasonal or occasional use. And so we have seen in Vermont a shift into more owner-occupied homes, fewer rental homes, and fewer seasonal homes. Mm-hmm. So, take that for what it is. Mm-hmm. But I think the dynamic of housing and travel in general is always going to be changing. It's always going to be dynamic.
Right.
And so how do you help property owners? So if someone's looking to buy a property in Vermont as a potential rental, are you a membership organization where you want people who own properties to join your membership, and what do you provide to those individuals?
Yeah, so VTSTRA, we really focus on three core aspects: advocacy, education, and community. So when we are member based. Right now, our members consist of Vermont homeowners and property managers, either those solopreneurs or management companies that are based here in Vermont, and their employees. In a couple of weeks, probably by the time this airs, we'll be opening up our membership to encompass the larger community and include representation for service providers, so housekeepers, cleaners, realtors, concierge service, other tourism operators, basically anybody who serves the vacation rental industry. So aside from advocating and representing this community in Montpelier, we also provide our members with a ton of educational resources and content. So if you're looking to start a short-term rental, or you've been doing it for a while and maybe you want to learn some new technology or some different ways of managing your business, we do an annual conference, which is a big educational event. We also host webinars. We put out direct email content, and we have a member portal with over 100 resources for hosts to utilize.
And you do a good job of updating the municipalities, like what each town is doing as far as laws that they're proposing or passing, on your website as well. So that helps.
We do our best to keep up with what's going on in every town in Vermont. We are a statewide association, and so we rely on our members in their communities to help us track what's going on in their towns. There's unfortunately no centralized database in Vermont that I know of for town ordinances, so it becomes very challenging to keep track of, and these things can move very quickly at times. They can come up, they can kind of be tabled and come back without notice. It's very challenging to track, but we do our best to engage our members to help us with that, and we come together as a membership every month to discuss what's going on around the state.
Yeah. And what trends, you talked about some of the trends you're seeing in the shift of second homes and things along those lines. What other trends have you seen over the last 3 or 4 years in the marketplace when it comes to short-term rentals?
Specifically in Vermont, I feel like I'm seeing a really big shift towards that creative, unique, and alternative type of accommodation. We're seeing a lot of people create short-term rentals on their properties, building cabins, tree houses, farm stay experiences, things like that. Obviously, that is so tied to, again, Vermont's appeal as a brand and as a destination is that unique, like,
any shipping containers?
A couple of shipping containers, yes. Yeah, pretty much everything you could think of. And so, that's exciting to see. I love to see that personally, as it just does, I think, represent Vermont in so many ways, and it brings people out into parts of the state that they might not go otherwise. So yeah, that's been really fun.
And what are some of the challenges as an organization you face on a day-to-day basis?
Well, I guess like everybody, staffing. We are a 2-woman show.
Okay.
We do have a board of directors that's very engaged and highly committed, and they've been great. But we are a small and growing association, so I think we're experiencing the same challenges of any other small startup business as you kind of go from being volunteer run to your first employee and then second employee, and all of kind of the dealings that come with that. So on top of trying to support our members in all the ways that we want to, we're also trying to make sure that we're growing sustainably as an association as well.
Do you feel the people who are going to be impacted are organizing fast enough? So you think about like the people on one side who are against, properties being used as short-term rentals, or who are going to the town meetings and things along those lines, seem to be organized quickly and got the word out, and a lot of towns were making moves. Whereas maybe the people who benefit financially, like you said, property managers, cleaners, property owners, do you think it took them they were behind the curve a little bit? They're like, whoa, this like snuck up on us. And what are they doing to try to like mobilize? And
yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of reasons why we don't have enough public engagement in not just this issue, but, and particularly in this issue, because, one, a lot of the times we are talking about properties that are owned by folks who live out of state, meaning they're probably not plugged into Front Porch Forum or, getting the constant local media feed like residents are. So obviously they have a hard time participating or are often the last to know. And then also they don't have a vote. So, that can also come across when they're speaking with their town representatives as being kind of, a voice that they're not going to be listened to, which is unfortunate. And then from the workforce side, the folks who rely on this industry are the ones who don't have time to come to these meetings. They don't have that luxury. They're probably working or taking care of their families and not able to keep up, which is why it's so important that we bring them into our representative community, because we really, need to be representing those people, because those are the voters, are the Vermonters who are, making their lives off of this industry.
Exactly.
When you think about like the vision, right? What is it? What does that vision kind of look like for I guess maybe the short-term rental community to exist with the local community? Like what does that kind of look like?
I think it already exists. Yeah. It's just that there's a veil over it.
Right.
I've heard way too many times from people that they're afraid to even tell their neighbors what they're doing.
Right. Yeah.
Because
I can see that. Yeah.
Because they don't want to be judged.
Yeah.
But the short-term rental community is local.
Right.
Like it is here. It's all around us. Right. I'm pretty sure like everybody has a second or third, at most degree connection to a local who is running a short-term rental, whether it's just a room in their house or they've invested in a ski condo or a lake house or have, converted the second home that's been in their family for generations finally into a shared space. We see a lot of that too.
Yeah.
So I would just say it's already here.
Right.
It's
Not
just a
necessarily
little
something
bit
to be afraid of. Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
It's I mean, think about all the local restaurants that you love to go to.
Right.
They wouldn't be here if we didn't have the visitors to go and patronize them.
Yeah.
Because locals alone aren't enough to
Right.
support those businesses.
And of course, we always hear the horror stories, So, like you said before, I mean, I know one of the arguments is, there's increased traffic or someone having a party or things along those lines. But you always hear like those worst case scenarios when probably the majority of the time, like you said, the neighbor doesn't even know what's going on because there's no different in their life.
Right. And again, that's where, there's the emotional argument and perspective, and then there's the factual perspective. And, the data says that short-term rentals are, I think, 4 times less likely to cause a noise or disturbance than a long-term rental apartment is. Anecdotally, when we were advocating for our community in Burlington, I called the police department and asked for a complaint history.
Yep.
I asked them for, through public records, I asked them if they could send me a copy of any complaints at all, any topic related to short-term rentals in the past 5 years. And they sent me a 2-page report. Half of the complaints were COVID related, people reporting gatherings at not noise or anything like that, but just out of state plates. We all remember those times.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Okay. And then I said, okay, great. Thank you. Now, can I see a report of just noise violations in all rentals in the past 1 year? And she got back to me right away saying, are you sure? Because that would be a 3,000-page report. So I said, nope, that's okay. That's really all I wanted to know.
Yeah, exactly.
So, I think when something bad does happen, and we do this is human nature, we sensationalize it, we remember it, we hold on to it, but we forget that every day that goes by that there isn't a complaint, have been hundreds of success stories where there's been no issue.
Right. And again, you mentioned the communities that are going to be impacted the most if these regulations go into place are going to be really the smaller communities, those out of the way towns that might not have a hotel,
right?
But they have a couple restaurants, and they have the need for that tourism, and here's an opportunity to just I'm going to rent the 2-bedroom over here, and I'm going to hang out in the town,
right?
And I think that's the bigger picture as well. It's like what's going to be the negative impact if you take that tourism away,
right? Yeah. And I think Vermont also needs to be prepared for growth, in ways that we haven't really kept up with. So whether it's an increase in visitors, whether it's an increase in resident population, there are actual strategic ways that we as communities and as our government can prepare us for that and help mitigate any kind of issues that would come up with that. But, really one of the biggest reasons that we work hard to educate hosts is because, we want to see reasonable regulations in place at the state level. We would prefer not to have the patchwork approach of town by town rules. It's very confusing. Yeah. It's very economically imbalanced if you're pitting one town against another right next to each other. But also we want to see good operators and responsible operators. We have no interest in representing hosts who don't follow safety protocols, who don't follow best practices, who aren't paying their taxes. Right. First step with everything is education and awareness. And we find that the vast majority of folks who host in Vermont do so with passion and with a love for Vermont and for their community, and absolutely want to be following the laws. Yep. But they have a hard time when the laws are unclear, when the laws are unknown, or they don't exist yet, or they're changing. And so we do our best to try to help people find those resources that they need to make sure that they are in compliance, and not only in compliance now, but prepared for what might be coming down in the future.
Would you support, or does the organization have a stance on, like, I think it was South Burlington had some pretty aggressive rules that they were putting in place, as in regards to like registering and contact. And I think one of the things that came up, and one of the arguments pro registering is, if there's a fire, we don't necessarily know who owns that property, or we don't know who the contact is, and that might be a myth or not. But is there some level of having a registry where it's like, okay, if you want to do this, we need to know, at this road, you're the owner, you're the contact if something happens. Would that be a good step, you think, to satisfy maybe both sides? Or?
Well, absolutely. I believe the 911 switchboard should have the emergency contact for every building owner, regardless of whether it's a primary home, an office building, of course, across the board. I think what becomes problematic is when we take basic requirements and measures like that and only apply them to a very small subset of the issue. Because if safety really is the top priority, then we would apply all those same standards to our long-term rentals as well, and even to our owner-occupied homes if we're really concerned about people's well-being and safety.
Right. Because and that's a great point, because that sounds like you're just targeting the short-term rental person by using that excuse of why you don't want to.
Right.
So if we're going to have common sense, it should be like you said, across the board.
Yeah, let's also protect our local renters and not just our visitors.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Did you have any?
Yeah, so what's kind of next for you guys? You mentioned pulling in kind of the service providers, which I think will be a valuable step,
Yeah.
But what do you kind of see as your next step down the line?
Well, we really kind of respond to the needs of the moment. So we will continue to try to reach more hosts across the state and more property managers, bring them that education, those professional standards and development opportunities. This year we are actually hosting a couple of different retreats, small group retreats. So these will be opportunities for individuals who really want to invest in themselves and their short-term rental business in Vermont to really make some leaps and bounds. So we have a cohort running in June for individual hosts, a cohort running in August for property managers who are managing 5 to 50 properties, and then a cohort in December for farm stay hosts. So really looking to help farmers diversify their agritourism and helping them come up with a business plan for a short-term rental on their property.
Great. I like that.
Perfect. All right. Well, I think that does it.
It does.
Yeah. Julie, where can they find you if they want to learn more information?
Oh, you can find us online at VTSTRA.org. We're also on Instagram at VTSTRA and Facebook at Vermont STRA. Our contact information is there. Yeah. We have lots of great resources for the community, for hosts, for government officials, for the media. So please check us out.
Nice.
Fantastic.
All right, well, that does it. This has been another episode of Vermonters in Business. Julie, we appreciate you coming on the show. And as always, I always close. If you know somebody that's doing outstanding work in their community, send them our way. We'd love to have them on.
Great.
Thank
you.
Cool.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much. Good job.